Good morning, everybody. So I was going to do something last time, and then we moved it to this time, and we made it a little bit longer. And so I'm going to do a couple of things here, and mostly it's really just going to be open for lots of just dumping on you, and then to have a fun discussion on a lot of things. So I thought I would just do a quick update on where we see things happening in our world anyway around transactions. Sales of companies. It's a weird time, as many of you know. And in the meantime, I came across this survey Bank of America did, and I was going through it, and it's really interesting. And I'm just going to kind of put it up, kind of walk through it, and I think it'll engender a lot of discussion as well. But one of the most interesting things is that it's about 4 months old. And so it'd be really fascinating to look through it, realizing that the survey was done 4.5 months ago, and where things might be just 4 months later in our own psyches and situations and what we're seeing out there. So I'll go quickly through things. I know you guys are not shy. Please jump in, stop me if you have a question or something along the way. And we should have plenty of time to talk and all that other fun stuff. So quickly, just setting stage for me. Many of you know this, but we are selling companies, right? So we're doing that broker role. What we've learned over a couple of decades is most people aren't ready, so we get heavily into working from a consulting perspective on building value over a period of time. Once the owners realize that it's not worth $8 gazillion that they thought it was, certified management consulting started up almost a little over 2 years ago. Exit Planning Exchange, a professional association, which is made up of consultants of all stripes, along with all of the typical folks you think of as a deal team, the attorney, CPA, et cetera. Corporate history, finance, banking, M&A operations, pretty broad over the years before starting up in 2000. So we are this. I try to distill this down. All of you marketing and messaging experts can give me feedback on it, but really focused on pretty much every word on here. It's very consultative. It's a lot of education for the owner. The collaborative advisory team is probably the key thing, and it's not just advisors talking to each other. It's intense working together, communicating together, bringing the right solutions to the client, focused on obviously building value and selling companies the right way, according to me anyway. So we're building value over a period of time when they're not ready. And then, working towards optimizing the sales. Sometimes it's a merger, sometimes it's internal, sometimes it's family, which is tons of fun. I say that jokingly. Often, again, I just do this. I put it out to highlight it. It's working together is magic. You get 6 or 8, whatever, of the advisors in a room, and you got a lot of brain power. The world as we see it, so. A lot of these things go both ways, right? So the opportunity right now still is, taxes aren't up yet. Interest rates are just ridiculously low. And there's literally trillions of dollars out there looking for a home, looking for good companies. Still an imperfect marketplace, but lots going on. On the flip side, especially if you're an owner, a boomer owner, and this is not new with COVID, but it's just, and I've listed 5 things, there's another 100 things, but they're gambling by definition, especially with their age and what can happen next week and next year. Who knows where all these things are going. They need to at least be planning, and they typically are not. Ideally, they would have gotten out a lot earlier, but they think they're invincible and they're going to last forever. Again, this goes both ways. We are seeing a lot of owners that they've gotten woken up, again, especially the boomers, and they're reaching out a little bit more. So they are making phone calls to at least get some advice and help. They're also getting a lot of phone calls. Hey, I want to buy you. There's still a lot of that going on. The activity for me, gets front and center when I look at my pipeline, and there's something like 25 prospects in the pipeline. Half of those aren't going to happen, et cetera, but there's so much activity. Again, this cuts both ways, right? So it's time to get out. The business is challenging. And so it's an opportunity on the buyer side, right? With fatigued, troubled sellers of whatever age. At least 2 people on a call this morning, I think 3, we're looking to hire. I don't know anybody who's not looking to hire. It's insane. I think we hit, last I saw was 10 million open jobs, the highest ever since the US has been tracking that. So crazy. Value, what? Value's up. Some are, obvious industries that are doing great, e-commerce, and then, going through COVID with airlines, hotels, restaurants, and others. So it's really a mixed bag, but that can happen. Options. What I said earlier, we do a lot of education of clients. Typically they just think I wake up one day, I sell, I'm going to be a buyer next week, I'm going to get a check and walk away. And there's a lot more to it. So those options make it a little bit easier. The other positive things for owners coming through COVID, if they're not selling right away, that 2020 year, gets further and further in the past. And so it's not as important as the years tick by. You typically focus in on the last few years as you're starting that process of valuation and negotiation. So that's a positive if it's a younger company that has survived. These are just a couple things going on for us right now. It just kind of gives you a breadth of things. That first bullet that's coming up here actually be probably the largest project that we will have had. We just closed a deal at 4 times what the first offer was. And again, the point there is simply get the right team around you to make it happen. It's not always going to be that jump, but having the right team helps a lot. And then the third bullet there, we're working 2+ years now into a project with a client that knew they weren't ready, and we took a look at value, wasn't where they needed, and so we're laser focused on consulting and building value. And we've probably brought in about 10 folks doing different things to help make that happen. And currently an interesting one, and this really points to one of the absolute key things that owners need to understand. The first thing is what the value is today. How can they possibly make a decision? So we're working on this is a family business, and the breadth of these options for them that they're thinking is huge. And so we've got to start with the value, and that's what we're in the middle of. Do they sell today, right? Do they work for a couple of years to build it? Or does that second gen person just keep going long term and they really can't do anything until they know what it's worth, and they have no idea today, obviously. This is in our pipeline, or not in our pipeline. This is what we're currently representing and selling, except that last line item. We heard about wine earlier. So there you go, wine. But it's wide ranging. And like I say, it's the activity is intense. How can we all work together? This is the kind of thing that we work with, like to see. So, if you've got clients like this and or like to play in this market, that gives you a sense of where we generally work. I won't go through reading all of it. I point out though that the battle fatigue with COVID is huge, and everybody on here can be part of helping these folks muddle through this. And again, I keep coming back to it, but the most frustrating part for me is seeing those boomers who aren't doing what they need to be doing. And it's not for them. The issue is they're not taking any action, and it's going to be kind of a disaster for them and their family, their employees, and so on. Always looking for opportunities to get out in front of folks. And that last line there on the bottom left, happy to just talk with individual business owners just to kind of get them set on the right track. Happy to do that, whether we work with them or not. And I think some of you have seen this before. How do we get them to start to do something? I think these 2 questions, if you ask these of anybody who owns a business, and then don't let them BS you with their answers, you might be helping them by getting them to think about some things. When are they getting out? And they're kind of, I always say, trick questions, right? So how has your exit plan changed coming out of COVID? They don't have an exit plan, but they'll come up with something and it might get a conversation going. And then I will say people tend to get intrigued by value, even those that think they know what it is. So these 2 questions might get you going. even just within your own worlds with what you're doing with them might help them better focus with whatever your expertise is. So so that's it. That was just very quick. I wanted to kind of give you that background, a little bit of my background, how we see things. And so I'll pause there to see if there's any discussion, questions, comments at all.
David, I have something real quick. I've got someone that I'm in another group with, and he's a business coach, and he says a lot of times, a couple of that he's working with right now, their whole idea was to sell their business. And he's like, you're in no position to sell your business, because if you leave, there's no one here to tell people what to do. You need to get someone trained and someone in here and a couple more layers down of people that are going to be able to be there for whoever buys your business. Yes. And so would he be a good contact for you when the person, he's got them ready to sell and they're ready to go on the market?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah, because it, that all that he's working on with them, we can early on, just kind of engage with him around, okay, you think about it, any business owner can be doing 1,000 things a day. So the prioritization of that towards their specific goal to exit would be, that'd be a great partnership. That's typically, Ken, the first thing the buyers are typically looking at. What's in the head of that owner? What happens if that owner gets removed from the equation, even if there's an overlap period? And so many people are horrible. That's just, they are the business, right?
Well, that's what he deals with, is a lot of business owners who they put their whole life into this, and they are looking to exit here, but they're in no position to exit without the company falling apart. So
one of the toughest things, but we've just learned to be tough and do it, is to tell the owner, you have to become absolutely irrelevant. After 30 years, that can be tough, and we explain it, but it also factors into when we do the estimate of value. We actually factor that in to get them to understand that if you can, delegate this stuff, push this down, and get irrelevant, the value can go up dramatically. Yeah.
Yeah, no, David, I wanted you to talk a little bit about along those lines, the equity position of a business or the multiple that people expect. The difference between a business that, and it's in the old history, is bricks and mortar, has a lease, has an ongoing future that you can net present value very simply, compared to a service related business or an e-commerce business that could fold, could go away with the owner, as Ken was saying, or could, doesn't have a long future out there unless you're operating the business. How do you really judge the equity position or the multiples for those two types of businesses?
I would say, short of taking the 6 hours to go through that, my first comment headline is just, it's all the same, right? In other words, you're looking at the history of what they've done, whether they're service or product, the stability thereof, the infrastructure and systems, what is in the owner's head, whether it's a service business or not, have they built out, contracts, have they built out recurring revenue? So, I would say that the premise of the kind of business, it doesn't really matter, right? Because I hear from a lot of, let's say, solo professional service firms, for example. And so often in their head, they're just going to work and, shut the doors, right? That's what they're thinking. But even those, with some strategy, some really cool initiatives, can make that a sellable entity. So yeah, it's I would say it's across the board, because if it's just if it's a product, if it's if it's just a distributor, things can go away, but the initial exercise is the same. And then you're sort of negotiating, and the buyer's thinking about how solid all those things are.
Right. Yeah, and what Dave and I do, we have insight to a lot of both of those. And if you have a restaurant that does $1 million, has a 20-year lease, makes $100,000 a year, and you have a service business that, let's say it's painting, your client's as good as your marketing and the rest, still does $1 million, still makes $100,000. The equity's not the same. The long-reaching view of what your proposal is, and it goes to what Ken was saying. In a lot of those cases, I've had people come to me and say, "Help me sell my business," said, unfortunately, you are your business. Unfortunately, your business is worth nothing if it doesn't have you attached to it, because you have the relationships with the clients. But yeah, that was kind of what I was talking about, because we always go through that. People don't like bricks and mortar anymore. They stay away from it. But the reality is, you can make a good equity position because you can have a sustainable long-term return in that, versus a service business that doesn't have a membership or reoccurring consumers.
Yeah. It's like I say, the analysis is similar, and then you just once you analyze it, you get to realize, Mark, what you were just saying, right? So I'm going to go in and look at that painter just like I'm going to go and look at the product manufacturer. It's just there's a lot less there with the painter if they have it. Now some of them may have long-term contracts, and there's commercials, residential. Do they have long-term contracts? Do they have extensive crews? Are they nation? So there's a lot of, and then yeah, I mean, it'll look different, and the cash will be different, and then you have those negotiations with the buyer, and that and that pricing can end up being extraordinarily different depending on the type of buyer as well, in all those situations. So yeah, it's a dynamic. When people say, "What's the multiple in my industry?" I just don't answer them, right? You can't, right? Even if there's some reference multiple out there, it's based on an average of the larger deals and the ones that are known and public. And so it's meaningless to some of these in the lower mid-market.
David, how do you factor in the HR piece, the people piece, the employees, right? The retention, the ability to recruit. For example, if you're going to open up a McDonald's restaurant today, you're going to have a really tough time hiring people, right? And especially in some of the, an HVAC company, whatever, the specialized skills, construction, very, very difficult. How does that factor today's world in terms of the valuation, how close, let's say, an Amazon is, it's sucking up talent? How does that play in?
It does, and it's a great question. And again, I'd say this, first of all these issues that we're talking about, it doesn't matter that we're, in the middle of pandemic or not. I mean, they're all the same issues. There's just different problems going on that everybody's looking at. So one answer to that, Scott, is an experienced buyer or well represented is going to be looking at all that, right? Everything we've talked about, really. On the people side, it's key. I don't think enough companies, enough sellers take that into account, the people side of it, right? Because it can make such a difference when we are looking at, we're looking at all that with any one of our clients. And again, what happens is this area, or what Mark is talking about, is they're going to go in, they're going to look, they're going to assess, they're going to look at who's in there, number one. And then the other thing is, they're not going to, they can't guarantee that those people will stay, right? Short of, you can get into some, contracts and,
sure,
and agreements and payments and bonuses. But to me, it's critical in my just overall, work experience. But doing all this, people don't take that into account, because you could have a few key people, and if they're not locked down, they can walk as well if you're counting on it, right?
Right.
So again, it depends on the buyer too, right? You may have a buyer where they truly don't need, many of the people, right? They may have, if it's a competitor, if they're in the same industry, or they may need few of those. But it kind of ties back to what we talked about at the beginning with Ken, where you want not just a great team working well together, competent, all those good things, but also being able to do everything, and the owner with the owner being irrelevant. So yeah.
Right, and then the onboarding piece is critical, right? What happens in the first couple of days when the new owner takes over, and what do they say to their people, and how, and all that different stuff, right? But also, the rumors often start about the business being sold, right? Because you cut back on all your expenses, and all of a sudden you don't have copy paper for a month anymore. You have a copy paper for 3 days. Or pencils, or piece of equipment, and we decided not to buy that right now, right? So rumors spread pretty fast.
Yeah, so we get that question, a lot. Well, sometimes people don't bring it up, and we do, and then we get it a lot, and it's like, can we not tell anybody until that we sign the paper, across the table? And the answer is no. You've got to have a communication plan. Who do you have to tell early on, and make that a signed document in terms of confidentiality. And then at some point, you kind of have to communicate. The assumption is that you can have, nobody find out that this is happening. But if you're talking to several potential buyers, if you're getting all the financial statements internally and the sales data and so on, right, the rumors do start. So I always say you've got to figure it out be as open as you can, as early as you can, have the discussions. I'm pleasantly surprised. A lot of our sellers are not looking just for that highest price, but they really are looking to the right fit in a buyer and in part who they might keep on and that kind of thing. So yeah, my corporate days, we would do these huge M&A projects, global projects. The secret code name for the project.
Yeah.
There's 400 people working on it. It's going to get out, and so even on a smaller scale. So you want to be ready with that communication plan for sure.
Yeah, I can give you the tale of two sons and the people thing. In the last 2 years, both my sons' companies have been acquired. One got acquired by a competitor in M&A, and they did a really good job of saying we're getting larger. There's going to be more opportunities. He's been promoted. He loves it. The other one was acquired by big money. Wanted the company to kind of run the way it did, but squeezed the juice out of it. Didn't really give anybody insight to where they were going or what they were. He's gone. He left. God, that was about 6 weeks ago. Just left, and that company is a hugely successful company. But he just didn't see his path, or there was no option there for him to do anything. So he's left the company. So it does play a huge piece in an acquisition on what that message is. How do you sustain those employees if you want them? And now they've been trying to chase him to get him back because he was one of their top performing salesmen, but not going to happen. He's enjoying where he is now.
Keeping them easier than trying to rehire somebody to replace them.
Yeah,
if they're good.
Yeah. So I would say for the HR people on board, especially Scott, a big opportunity area is on the integration side.
Yeah.
After the acquisition has taken place. Of course, you want to get the contract before the acquisition takes place, but and one of our founding members, Stan Stout, is keeping very busy working on those activities with a couple of private equity groups. Big opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything else? Dave, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to kind of piggyback on some of the stuff that you and Mark were talking about earlier, the whole brick and mortar versus service business, because it really is, there's a lot of factors, I guess, right? So, yeah, every business is so dependent on their reputation for creating the value of the business, right? But a retail type business is more about, you're not dependent on your reputation with every single customer because you just got people coming in because your vocation or whatever, versus a service business where your reputation is how you build that business. And so then you factor in that HR piece, because if you're the owner and you're smart about it, and I know this is what you work with people on, Dave, is that reputation gets built on the team, not the owner. Right? Because whether the owner's there or not, it's the team that's in direct contact with the customer. And so that's building the reputation. But then the other factor is, Mark, you were talking about this earlier. The brick and mortar business, maybe they do a higher volume, but they've got a lower EBITDA percentage because they've got a lot more overhead than a service business, right? So you might do the same, half the volume, but make the same amount of EBITDA because in a service business, because you've got such a, it's basically you pay labor and a little bit of materials, right? So, and I think franchisors are starting to understand these kinds of things, and they're also understanding that people want to get into business and kind of be a semi-absentee or even an absentee type owner. So a lot of these service businesses, like in the construction, they actually have models set up where you don't have to hire anybody. You're using subs to do all the work, and you've got and they have relationships with subs, and so they can connect you and build those relationships with the subcontractors. And so, they're getting into these businesses and just kind of changing the model from an employee to a contractor type model. It's really a lot of stuff happening.
Dave, have you ever experienced a shift from a company whose reputation was with the owner and has shifted to the team?
Well, that's a great question. Well, we're working with a client now where that is part of the process the last couple of years. But it's really with everybody. I mean, it has to be. And I'm trying to think. There may be one or two that have done a good job, and they are fairly relevant. Yeah, and I guess there are a couple as I'm thinking about it. Yeah, one now we've got that we're on the sell side for that. He's had just a lot going on. I won't go into all of it on the personal side. So he hasn't been around for much of the last year, and the company's doing just swimmingly well. So there are positive examples of that. You know, he's built the team, built the processes, built the leadership team. You know, given him the delegated responsibility, authority, et cetera. So there are cases, but I would say everybody's on a continuum in my experience of that. I mean, you're not going to be 100% exactly, but you got to get yourself out to where you're looking strategically at things and can move away to monetize things. And I would say also the other part of it is, and this is a real issue again, I think especially for the boomers, is doing that also will shorten the time that you're going to have to stay on with the buyer if you don't want to be there for a long time. So there's that as well in the mix. But yeah.
David, what were the ways that you've handled when there's been a sale when the seller has family members working in the company, right? And they're in critical positions and they said, I don't want the business or for whatever reason, right? But they're in critical, knowledge, expertise, whatever. And the new buyers coming in and there's all that dynamic. Share a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, at the high level, all you can do is treat them like anybody else. If they don't want to buy it and they're staying in the business and the buyer, wants them, or at least initially says they do, right? Most buyers are going to say, unless it's very clear up front for some reason, they're going to say, yeah, we'll keep everybody. Well, they can do whatever they want once they buy the company. So yeah, in one sense, the family member, is like anybody else. Pretty much that's it, actually. It becomes like anybody else in terms of do they want to keep them or not, or are they going to quit or not? Yeah,
David, one of the things I did, I had a consultation this week that I had to do a little bit more research. So I called a lot of my ex-franchisees that own tons of restaurants to get their perspective on today's environment, on what they're looking at in the future, what investments they're planning on making. And thinking about it, it makes all the sense, but I had never thought this year was a huge proponent. I understand if you have a lot of stocks, you're looking at capital gains, but they said almost 100% of their time right now in these large organizations is keyed on capital gains. They're having meeting after meeting with their financial advisors, whether they're going to trusts or they're selling their things, changing companies. Are you seeing a ton of that? And that window is closing this year, but they were amazed at two of the companies they deal with. So Taco Bell gave a end of this month is the last time you could put in a contract to transfer your business because they have so much transfer going on. But I was amazed to hear that the capital gains concern was really doing that much business this year.
Yeah. So, it always does. Any kind of tax issues people look at, obviously in these transition times, everyone's expecting everything to go up. So there is that. We don't know when it's going to happen. I mean, things, they're obviously not rushing to it. They're not going to rush to it. I don't have the crystal ball. But, it seems like they know that would be a stupid move to rush to do that. But, you expect it's coming. And so a lot of that happens. You have to take everything into account. That could absolutely be the driver in a lot of businesses, no question, for a lot of these folks.
I was just amazed at how much activity they were doing, and there's no laws passed, but they're assuming it's going to be passed this year and be implemented next year.
Yeah, and that's fine, right? I would look at other things, right? You don't necessarily, personally or business-wise, want to have the tax tail wag the dog kind of thing. You just don't know, right? And if it's time to sell and they want to move on to something else anyway, and it makes sense and all that, great. But I mean, if they have a business that they were going to spend another 5 years anyway in, or build up significantly.
Yeah, with these guys, they're not selling out, but they're tucking away. So whether they're selling to another, selling to a real estate company that they also own, they're going to realize a whole mess of tax burden because they're looking at the 15% to 39 or 30, something almost doubling. They just said it's just unbelievable. But when you're in a franchise organization, you've got to go get all those contracts changed to the new company and the rest. If you're in your own independent business, you still have a deadline. You've got to, unless you're doing a 1031 exchange or something where you're not going to realize the tax benefits, then you're in a position that's, you could be losing, if it's a long-term gain, you could be losing 15, 20% of your, equity in your business.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, you've got so many constraints in the franchise world, certainly, to think about. I always say, look at everything, that you're looking to do, personally, and if you have 10 years, let's say, to go, well, okay, things are going to go up, they're going to go down tax-wise, but if you're in a situation where you're older, you're sitting there with a warehouse to sell, other real estate to sell, with the business. Interest rates are stunningly low. Real estate rates are stunningly high. Yeah, in the mix for a lot of people, it makes sense to get the heck out.
If you own property, now might be a good time to do a sale leaseback.
Yeah,
If you have
doing all
already done
kinds of stuff.
Okay. If anybody,
A couple of them are creating different businesses and changing them. A number of them were doing it with trust, which I don't know exactly how you do that, but I thought that was kind of interesting how you get away from a capital gains issue with the trust. Maybe it's just converting.
So, but here's the point. The point, though, I would say is that the world is just too complex, and that any seller needs to get the advice of a whole slew of folks that are collaborating together, right? Because on all this stuff we're talking about, CPA, the tax, the attorney, the estate planning, right? It's these things are just too complex, and there's a lot of things that can go wrong. I will say, sum up that issue though. When we start talking about value, and somebody says, "Oh, okay, it's worth $5 million," they'll be lucky if they can walk away with 2.5 in their pocket, and they don't understand that either, right? Whatever you can optimize in taxes, but the fees, all that kind of stuff, and then for the most part, they're going to end up investing something to clean it up a little bit. So, I'll tell you what, we can keep going, but let me just put this up real quick. Talk through a little bit of it. We can just talk more, but I thought this was really interesting. Here, let me share screen. Is that all on screen now? Y'all see that now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry. Thanks. So I don't want to take a lot of time. And this is just a report. I didn't bother pulling things out and PowerPointing it, but so this was, I think, back in, survey was March through May, early May of 2021, small business owners. So, so what's their take on the local economy and the national economy improving? Up 56 and 50%. I don't know what y'all think. My gut on this, it would be lower now as we're going into the fall with resurgence in COVID, with Afghanistan and all kinds of other things. Just my own personal take. I'm not the economist. This is interesting. So I expect my revenue to increase, is at a really, at a low there, and then back up to 60%. I wonder what's in people's heads. We can come back all through this and touch on any of the particular. I thought, let me just kind of walk through some of this. 79% believe a widely available vaccine and or herd immunity will be helpful in bringing their business back to normal. So that's interesting. Only 15% back to normal. Again, think of the time period on this again. Despite navigating unique challenges brought on by coronavirus, nearly all entrepreneurs rate their business's financial situation as strong or fair. So 40% strong, 54% fair, which is, is interesting. In my world, I see a lot of strong businesses. If they were strong before COVID, they kind of held their own or didn't dip too much.
Yeah, no, David, you're right, because I recently had a client that, they started during COVID and they were amazing. And it's like, it's an outdoor recreational thing. So it's like, everybody, they didn't have to do any advertising, like they couldn't grow fast enough. And then all of a sudden, like July, they said they saw a drop off. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're normal business now, right? Like now you actually have to compete as a normal business, right? And so now we're going through that discussion of, okay, you know, like, how do you grow? What's the, you know, what are my actual expectations? Because, you know, now it's a little different than, you know, business was struggling.
Yeah, it's fascinating, really. And I will say again, you know, from my perspective, underscore, if you had a solid business, and you know, just define solid, like we all know, people did all right. You know, they made it through, maybe with the PPP, but they're coming back out of it all. So this was a whole range of just quick, you know, issues on. So this goes back to, as you can see there, spring 2020, fall 2020, and then spring of 2021, and the progression on the, you know, all these different issues. So this one I think is just interesting, because if you look at it, sort of gauge it, and then think about, you know, are these things going to be, if we did this today of these same people, what would they be? What would that red bar look like, you know, on these different topics? Health care, cost. And I think, let me actually go back up, sorry. What they're concerned with, basically. So in healthcare, obviously, is, you know, it doesn't matter pandemic or not, it's always been that way, of course. Commodity prices, supply chain, I mean, to me, that's, you know, I think worse than in spring. I don't know a client who doesn't have issues dramatically so in supply chain, whether it's just access or cost. And you can read through these, you know, consumer spending, you know, tax rates. You know, again, my sense is it's not going to happen this year, but, you know, still could. Even next year, if we are where we are with the economy, you know, they may not feel like they can do it. The dollar, you got interest rates that are just insane. You know, regulation, minimum wage. So it's, you know, interesting, just looking at all these things.
Yeah, I just posted the link to that report.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say I could pass that around too. So that's that one, competition for talent. Holy moly! You know, I don't know anybody who's not looking for people, looking for good people. You know, and I'll say this too, right? We asked Scott asked, you know, the question about people and team and your staff and working with them the right way and all those good things that we know to keep. You know, to me, it's the same thing. If you were running your business well, and part of running your business well was doing right by your people, you know, hopefully you've kept the majority of them. You know, you've had to navigate through working from home or at the office and that kind of thing for those roles where you can. You know, but those lower wage workers and just across the industries is really tough. You know, I think what Mark, you're talking about, you know, hiring for McDonald's or something like that. Yeah, I give kudos to my girlfriend who's you know, runs it's a small kind of manufacturing environment. So a lot of those lower level workers, but you know, I'd be talking to her and she's like, yeah, well, I gave them all, you know, dollar raise and this and that. I'm like, well, but, you know, she hasn't lost anybody. You know, she's done right by them, you know, by work, you know, work environment and how she treats them and compensation and all those things. So there are companies out there, I think, that have kept their folks through all of this, doing it the right way, you know, and that really can be done, in my humble opinion. So yeah, here you go, back to trying to find people. It is just crazy. Let's see what's left here. Talk quick. So this is really interesting, right? And again, this is, I don't know if this is pandemic colored or not, but you know, they're looking at top things they're looking at, right? Work experience, integrity, passion, ability to learn, creativity, versatility are up there, which is really kind of interesting. I think most of those things are good, right? You can teach a lot if you find the right person. This though, you know, cultural fit, this is like, you know, this is not surprising, but it's still sort of alarming because, you know, Scott, in your world, and you pretty much asked that is so key to everything else. You need all these other things, but when you're not taking the care as you're screening and vetting and then, you know, integrating into the team, it can be a disaster, you know, and a nightmare.
Well, I think it's also interesting that only, if you go to the top left, that only 46% look for integrity.
Yeah,
And what I'm saying by that is it's so the competition is so high for talent right now that companies are basically saying it's okay if you don't have that. We're willing to allow a little bit of integrity issues to pass. That's
one thing that I would recommend
would have been 100%.
Yeah.
One thing that I would recommend when you're looking at statistics from entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs really aren't very good at recruiting and selection. Most people haven't been trained in recruiting selection anyway, even in major corporations. And entrepreneurs are probably the worst. Plus, entrepreneurs are so, by definition, are so chaotic in their management style that they couldn't probably even define, what the culture is all about. So this is interesting, but I really have to take the whole feedback from entrepreneurs with a grain of salt, because the folks that I work with, I have to train them how to think about recruiting and selection. And shameless plug, I've got a blog post to that effect up on this week's blog post. For what it's worth.
It's again, to me, these issues, in my experience, are timeless. Unfortunately, better or worse. Like now, there may be more bringing people on because we need bodies, kinds of things. But I would, I get, short of an absolute emergency, I would favor, continuing to look for the right folks, because it's, it can be more disruptive than scrambling with who you have, I think, sometimes.
This kind of speaks to why most entrepreneurs don't last long in their company, right? They get started up and then they hire somebody to run it because they don't know how to run a company. They just know how to come up with ideas and get them started.
But there's another opportunity for especially HR people that want to work with entrepreneurs, is to really help them understand how to build a team, how to do recruiting and selection and onboarding effectively, and how to build a culture. So for guys like Scott and Jim Chukansky and those folks, huge opportunity.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between an entrepreneur that used to be an executive in a W-2 world or an entrepreneur that's been an entrepreneur the entire time. I mean, it's night and day, and it is so hard to get an entrepreneur to bring, when their business gets large enough, to bring on more corporate-oriented people that can show them the path to a larger corporation. Going through that right now with the one that I'm talking with, like I said, the equity partner and the owner sat down with me, and it was honestly like talking to two different people about and they've signed an agreement on their goals on where they want to take the company, but it sounded like talking to two different people on what they wanted to do.
I ended up doing them. Oh, go ahead, Carl.
I was going to say, as a cautionary note, also, you got to know, it would be good to know how this question was asked. Were these open-ended responses? Were these choices given to the respondent? Were they limited to how many choices they could make? So a lot of that goes into how the question is answered.
Yeah, I know nobody reads books anymore, but the E-Myth is a great book if you want to learn about entrepreneurs. So.
Yeah, and this, to Carl, to your point, you got to take all these with a grain of salt. I always say, look at trends, don't zone in on the exact percentage. But on the people side, we're working with a client now. We've been for a couple of years, and one of the key components has been that human capital piece. And one of our colleagues is in there. It's amazing getting in there and really truly working at getting the owners to understand. But it's tough. That's, I think, one of the areas that I've seen business owners they just don't understand. They can't see it, can't comprehend it. Why are you spending all this time to just, do your job? Well, we have the right job descriptions or whatever. But when you really can get in there and make sure people are doing what they want to be doing and are good at and understanding and pulling all the pieces together, it's huge. It can make a big difference. But I see very little understanding of that. So here's the coronavirus challenges and recovery. 55% faced operational challenges in the pandemic, including blah, 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 which is, I think, probably got to be pretty low, a low percentage. But there's a little bit of the issues. And this is actually here. So here's a really interesting one, and I think a lesson for all of us. So look at this piece. Business owners say the following resources and programs help them navigate the pandemic: friends and family, CPA, local community, small business owners, other small business owners, banker, social media groups, communities, mentors, shop, small initiatives, shop small, I don't know what that is, state, local government programs, attorney advocacy groups, chambers of commerce. There's a bunch of us missing from there. And I think, again, this isn't just the pandemic, but when you have these entrepreneurs who started their company, are doing well, get no help, think they can do it all, it's always the CPA, right? They have to generally, have a CPA they go to, and that becomes their go-to. And, the CPAs can't do all of it. But, there's a lot of us not on this list. And that's where I think the whole idea for me, what I talked about earlier around collaboration, working together for the client, getting more of that team in there, probably could have short-circuited a lot of these issues. Again, pandemic times or not. But this is a slide in these numbers, we've talked about for years and years and years. Right? It's hard to get entrepreneurs often because they're working 80 hours a week and they're just doing
it also doesn't bode well for Chamber of Commerce either.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other, yeah.
Well, David, one thing I will say, there was a tremendous amount of, with respect to online communication, social media group, there's a tremendous amount of blogging, by, especially HR groups. I mean, Flex HR posted 3 or 4 really good ones for us that was out there. So, but you're right. Nothing on there that says consultant.
And there was a ton, right? There were blogs. Everybody and their grandmother started doing podcasts and all that stuff. So there was a ton of it out there. Absolutely, no question. That's why I said this is, forget we had a pandemic. I think this is the same situation. So it's a sort of a marketing issue for you marketing folks, right? And it's, I think, also pointing towards, hey, we need to be out there in some form or fashion to get in front of folks, and probably more in a collaborative manner. So
it could have been like Carl said too. Bank of America didn't put us on the list on the survey.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. No, that could be. It could be. Let's see. 68% of business owners tapped into various kinds of funding during the pandemic. So, obvious, nothing surprising. Personal business paid the PPP. I will say I've seen some, it was just chaos, right? I've had, a good few clients that are sitting with a pile of cash where they got the PPP, they spent it on what they needed to spend it on, but, they were doing well or they picked up quickly, that kind of thing. So it's nothing I don't think surprising there. Here's a big one, impact on health and wellness. So this is owners, right? Owners saying the impact the coronavirus had on them, mental health, physical health. I mean, that's huge and it's real. If you look at, if you look out there, the data, there is just a lot of depression. Even I think it was at the teen or early, young adult, even suicide rate is up, it's been boxed in, their home quarantine, whatever it happens to be. So this stuff really is real. 85% created extra stress around their business. And here's how they coped with it. So, you know what, there's a positive side, for me, we started April, maybe last year, doing a monthly Zoom call with my first cousins. Many of them I haven't seen for decades. So it was wonderful. We got them all, and we're still doing it now monthly, right? And that's going to continue on. So some positive, at least, coming out of all this. And then we've got just, I think, one more page. So you can see there kind of the split, how they feel about running the business. All these different, maybe nothing surprising there. No, here's an interesting one. Could be a controversial one, but we won't make it that way. It's interesting. so we just interviewed. So I think most of you know, we created the Atlanta chapter of Exit Planning Exchange a few years ago. We started up our radio show in January. We just had a, Jim, was Dave Daniels? Do you know Dave? Was he visiting or part of ITV?
Well, Dave did not renew his membership, but he was a member for a couple of years, based in Dallas.
Texas. Yeah. So we actually had him on interviewing him. So he does, after a long career of doing a lot of things, has been focused consulting with businesses, with leadership teams and owners on diversity, equity, inclusion. And without going into 12 hours of all that, I think, he's approaching it the right way. He's approaching it as a business issue. And we did this interview with him. And one of the questions I asked, I basically sort of asked the question with the assumption that a lot of the smaller owners, might be bigger and that, they're more aware in the corporate environment, maybe even mid-market, but that some of the smaller companies really weren't doing much with it, don't understand it, to integrate it. And he said, no, he said there's a lot of awareness in his world in these smaller businesses now because it has been everywhere, right? And there's a lot more activity, a lot more focus on these issues with much smaller companies than you might think, which I thought was kind of interesting. Just a side note on that topic. And then and here's basically this isn't new. People that understand what we're really talking about, your business is going to do much better. And we're not just talking about a race or a religion. You're talking about young people, you're talking about women. You just mix it up and you've got a whole lot more experience to bring to the table. Now you still have to work that same onboarding and integration and culture, but just look at the numbers there. And just more of it. Yeah. I had a client, so this was good, and this was a good reminder for me, current client, and we've brought various advisors to the table around them, and you end up working in your own little network and circle. And one of the partners actually said, hey, next time we need one of these folks in our plan over the next several months, can you make them look not like you? That's what they said to me. And that is a very small business. So just one data point for you. All right, I think this is the last page here. Oops. So what have they adjusted? Again, not surprising, sanitation, digital, online, et cetera. What we're seeing is a lot of the enhanced sanitation, quote unquote, that whole broad breadth of things is not going to go away. It's just always going to be there now. And then obviously getting online and doing things online as best you can. For me, I'll just, put it out there. It's not so much the sanitation side of it, and probably for a lot of you, the country is ready, right? Everybody's ready to not have to do so much in person, not necessarily from the sanitation side, but time perspective, right? So, I probably have saved 15 hours a week, literally a week in the car from pre-pandemic. And now the clients are used to that. You still want to go in, you still want to get face-to-face, but it's not going to have to be, every meeting, right? I don't need to spend 45 minutes to go to an hour meeting. And so I think that is going to be huge for everybody. It opens up, the whole country. For those of you who can work that way. We've had clients around the country before COVID, of course, but it just makes a bigger marketplace, I think, for all of us. More online, new ways to interact, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I think that's it. That's it. So just open to whatever discussion, anything we looked at here or anything else that you want to talk about. Nope. Good.
Good job, David.
Any questions for David? Well, thanks, David. You did a good job staying on time and covering the topic. Any other questions, comments?
Good meeting. Yep. No, good information, good discussion.
Good stories up front.
Cool. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go get ready for my second of 6 Zoom calls today.
All right, David. Well, thanks, everybody. You all have a great weekend. And look forward to talking to you all again real soon.
Thanks, Jim.
Hey, folks.
Have a good one, guys.
See y'all next month. Okay.